Welcome back to Firepower. Today we're standing at the edge of a seismic shift in the handgun world, one that will ripple through armories, department orders, and collector circles for years. Glock, the company that rewrote handgun design and built a global standard on polymer and simplicity, has pulled the plug on its legacy lineup. Production of Gen 3, Gen 4, and Gen 5 Glock models stops dealer stock clears, and the company is launching a new family called the Glock V Series. This is not a minor refresh, it's a strategic, existential move. And in the next 20 minutes, we'll unpack what happened, why it happened, what's different, and exactly what it means for you. Let's start with the facts as they stand. For decades, Glock handguns have dominated duty belts, civilian safes, and military contracts. The platform's clean simplicity, minimal parts, predictable function, and a worldwide aftermarket made it almost bulletproof to criticism. But the last few years changed the playing field. A wave of litigation and a tightening regulatory environment in multiple U.S. states forced Glock to make a brutal calculation: fight every suit, risking catastrophic legal costs and regional bans, or redesign the product to make it resilient to new legal tests. Glock chose survival through design. That decision culminates in two headline moves. First, the company has discontinued production of much of its legacy catalog, Gen 3, Gen 4, Gen 5, effective November 30th. Second, it will roll out the Glock V Series, a transitional generation that keeps the footprint and the feel most shooters expect, but replaces or seals internal components in ways meant to remove the company's legal exposure. The message is clear. Keep the strengths, remove the liabilities, and move forward. Why would Glock do something so dramatic? The answer is pressure. Legal, political, and economic. Over recent years, several jurisdictions have mounted lawsuits alleging that certain designs can be modified into fully automatic configurations or are otherwise readily convertible into weapons that fall afoul of stricter local statutes. Whether those claims are technically correct is a complex firearm engineering debate, but in a courtroom, perception and precedent matter as much as mechanical reality. When states begin to regard a design as non-compliant, whole swaths of the market can be cut off. That's a risk no manufacturer can ignore. Rather than bank on decades of courts and hope, Glock redesigned key internals to make conversion impractical without heavy machining. A change intended to satisfy stricter legal definitions while preserving shooter experience. So what is the V Series? On the outside, Glock wants you to feel at home. The grip angles, overall ergonomics, magazine compatibility, and accessory footprint are intentionally unchanged. Glock knows how critical holster and accessory compatibility is. Police fleets and private owners can't rebuild everything overnight. But inside the V Series is substantially different. The trigger group has been reworked. Glock removed the old cruciform connector architecture and moved to a more controlled, shorter trigger profile that resembles the company's performance trigger characteristics, but is produced in a way that's harder to modify. The slide and backplate areas have been redesigned to prevent or complicate the installation of conversion devices. Serializations and sealed components restrict easy interchangeability, and certain parts now require specialized tooling to access or modify. In short, Glock insulated the core firing system from casual or illicit modification while delivering a smoother, more refined break. That last point is important. Glock didn't simply neuter the gun to pass legal muster. The company invested heavily to keep, and in some ways improve, performance. Early police tests and internal evaluations show a lighter, crisper trigger with a confident reset. and reliability appears intact across mud, dust, and salt fog trials. If you're a shooter worried that a law-driven redesign will make your Glock into a liability on the line, the early signs indicate the opposite. A Glock that handles like the models you know, but with a trigger and internals engineered for modern legal realities. This is strategy as much as engineering. Glock understands its place on procurement lists, and the V Series is clearly aimed at preserving that pipeline. When law enforcement agencies issue RFPs and governments evaluate bidders, legal compliance is a major checkbox. A pistol that is structurally resistant to questionable modifications lowers administrative headaches and legal risk for agencies. That means Glock is positioning the V Series to be the safe, compliant option for the next wave of contracts, and in a market where every advantage counts, that's survival. Let's deal with the fallout. The discontinuation of legacy models creates immediate ripples in the secondary market and among armorers. Parts that were once inexpensive and plentiful will grow scarce. Slides, barrels, backplates, and factory triggers for Gen 3 to 5 will be sought after by collectors and gunsmiths maintaining older fleets. Aftermarket vendors will face a scramble, modify tooling, redesign compatible parts, and decide whether to support legacy models or pivot to the new V architecture. Expect prices on certain originals to rise and aftermarket inventories to be reshaped in the next 12 to 24 months. Collectors will react quickly. A Gen 5 MOS in original condition or a rare anniversary model suddenly moves from common to historical artifact. If you've ever thought about owning a piece of Glock history, now is literally the last public window to buy new from dealers. Once dealer stock clears, only the secondary market remains, and scarcity increases collectability and price. That's a market signal many shooters won't like, but it's a predictable economic consequence of discontinuing a platform that defined an era. Now let's separate the signals from the noise. Critics will call this a capitulation. Glock bowing to political pressure. That's one way to frame it. But there's another truth. Companies that survive long-term adapt to their regulatory environment and preserve their ability to serve customers, institutions, and mission-critical contracts. Glock's move reads like a company choosing calculated adaptation over attrition. It is possible to view it as both concession and shrewd engineering. Innovation often looks like surrender to those who value the old ways. We also need to be realistic about what this does and doesn't change for end users. If you own a Gen 3, 4, or 5 Glock today, your pistol doesn't stop working on December 1st. Parts will remain available for a transition period, and Glock has publicly committed to supporting existing contracts and providing aftermarket components in the near term. Ammunition, magazines, and holsters don't vanish. What changes is long-term manufacturing and the future ecosystem. If you run a fleet, you will need a long-term sourcing plan. If you're a private owner, this is the time to assess whether you want to preserve a legacy piece or switch to the V Series when it's available. Let's talk about performance expectations for the V Series. Independent, real-world testing is essential, and we'll deliver that as soon as we get a sample. Early reports indicate a trigger that breaks around 4.5 to 5 pounds with a short, tactile reset. Smoother than typical stock Glock triggers and intentionally calibrated to avoid being mistaken for an aftermarket race trigger. Reliability across environmental extremes remains a top specification target for Glock, and engineers apparently spent months validating that the new internals endure dust, mud, salt fog, and neglect. In short, the V Series might feel like the natural evolution many shooters have wanted. A crisper trigger with the proven Glock chassis. But there's a secondary dynamic at play: regulatory signaling. By redesigning the interface points that many critics highlighted, Glock sends a message to regulators and courts. The company is proactive and cooperative. That could blunt some litigation, or at least change the legal calculus, because the claim of readily convertible loses traction if the manufacturer can demonstrate technical barriers that make conversion impractical without major machining. That's not a legal silver bullet, but it's a practical defense. What about the aftermarket and customization culture? This is complicated. The V Series maintains the external geometry and accessory points to preserve compatibility with holsters and most sight footprints, but internal differences may limit certain slide and trigger upgrades. Aftermarket companies will respond, and some will innovate new components for the V platform. Others will keep servicing legacy Glock parts for collectors and agencies that choose to hold older inventory. The broader effect will be a wave of new products and designs that align with the V Series architecture, a ripe opportunity for creative engineers and small manufacturers. Now, let's be clear about what you, the shooter, should do next. First, decide if you want to own a legacy model as a collectible or operational firearm. If yes, buy now while dealer stock still exists. Second, budget for the possibility that certain spare parts will become scarce and plan maintenance accordingly. Third, follow Glock's official guidance. Register with dealer notifications and official support channels to get accurate timelines on part support and new model availability. Fourth, if you're a department armorer or fleet manager, start conversations with procurement and budget teams now. Plan for a phased transition if you will adopt the V Series across a fleet. Finally, demand real-world testing. Don't accept marketing claims. Wait for independent reliability data before rewriting standard operating procedures. We should also consider the cultural and emotional effect. Brands are faith as much as function. A Glock represents a history of tens of millions of rounds, countless training hours, and a design philosophy that prizes simplicity. The V Series will need to earn that trust anew. Glock has the brand equity to do it, but trust is not automatic. It's proven by rounds fired in harsh conditions, by thousands of police officers relying on a pistol in the field, and by the quiet, mechanical consistency we all depend on. In the bigger picture, this development signals a maturing industry response to modern regulatory realities. Firearm design can no longer ignore legal definitions and public policy reactions. The companies that thrive will be those that fuse engineering excellence with legal foresight. Glock's move likely starts a cascade. Other manufacturers will evaluate their own exposure and may follow similar redesign paths to protect market access. To close, let me leave you with two simple truths. First, the end of Genesis 3, 4, and 5 is a historic mile marker. If you own one of those pistols, you now hold a piece of firearm history. Second, the start of the V Series is an intentional pivot, not a retreat. Glock is choosing to preserve market access, institutional trust, and technical excellence by moving forward under a new internal architecture. We'll be the first to test the V Series head-to-head against legacy models. Expect a rigorous, repeatable test battery, endurance runs, dust and mud, salt fog, drop tests, and consistent accuracy and speed measures. Subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll bring you the data, not the hype. This is firepower, where history meets performance and truth meets trigger pull. Tell us in the comments. Are you buying a legacy Glock while you can, or are you waiting to see what the V Series can do? Either way, stay safe. Stay informed, and we'll see you at the range.